This is the Slots and Sockets Podcast, episode number 5. I am iRdMoose.
I'm TurboPenguin.
TurboPenguin with a cup on his head. And today we've got some interesting AMD news about the 9900 and 9950X coming out, some weird Windows performance, and Intel might be coming out with HEDT desktops again with Arrow Lake. What do we got for today's show, Parker?
Let's see. Let's go kick it off early. So drivers, AMD and NVIDIA don't have new drivers. For all 7 people who are using Intel Arc, there is a new driver as of actually yesterday. So, and drivers tend to be more important with Arc than some of the other manufacturers. So get out there and get an update. All right. AMD has the new 9000 Gen processors, and really a mixed bag when it comes to a lot of the different people reviewing. Some negative, some middle of the ground, some wildly positive. And so it tends to be a little all over the place. And so reviews, people are kind of not sure what to think. And so we've had enough time for people to start playing and diving more into the 9000 series, and it seems to me like what we're seeing here is, from a performance perspective, that the Zen 5 processors are not, they're missing a piece here. There's got to be something that's half-baked, not ready, not working, because AMD has come out with some pretty, like, hey, by the way, you probably need to make sure core parking's working, and other things where it's like, where they're finally giving some guidance. And I think one of the things we're going to start seeing here is that AMD is going to come out and we're going to see some microcode updates. And
Munchkin interrupt us.
Yeah. BIOS is going to be a bigger deal. I think we're going to see some pretty hefty drivers. I think, normally speaking, those drivers come out probably once every couple of months, every 4 or 5 months. I think for Zen 5 owners, I would be looking for drivers more frequently than else. I do think when it's all said and done, I think that these are probably issues that can be sorted off with microcode updates. The other half is that we've heard some people kind of starting to question, like, they pushed it back a month. It wasn't, that they said they have abundance of caution. And, obviously it may be thinking about if this is software, maybe they should have pushed it back 2 or 3 months. There wasn't a huge need for them to release this right now. I mean, not like Intel has anything that they're going to do. I mean, they're trying to keep from, blowing themselves up. So it's a little interesting.
Seems like one hand Intel's been trying to blow themselves up, and other hand they're trying to bail themselves out. It's been a mess. Yeah.
So I mean, from the AMD side, it's interesting. So some people have said, there's some Windows settings, and like there's some pretty details about core parking, and admin accounts are making a difference. And so, all of these things come back to tell me that there's something with the software of these processors, whether that's a BIOS software, chipset. There is something funky going on.
Yeah, and well, in a lot of this testing too, kind of going back to the admin account thing, that was testing actually on the built-in administrator account that's in all Windows NT based systems, and it looks like it impacted the 7000 series as well. The 7800X3D did take a performance bump, and in some cases while the 9000 series parts did get some of a bump in the benchmarks I saw from using that account, the 7000 series kept right in step with it.
So the loaded question that I have for you is looking at where we're at right now. Um, I think we're going to see some bumps across the board for both the seventh and the ninth generation,
Yeah.
AMD processors, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, once Microsoft
I
addresses that
think
bug, yeah.
I think that I think that might be also an AMD thing to be like, why is this doing this? Why on earth would this have any performance in change? And to be honest, that seems like one of the things that's going to be coming up in a driver update to be like, yeah, it shouldn't be doing that. Like, I don't think that's a Microsoft thing. I really think that comes down to AMD to be like, but the truth is that now we're starting to look really in depth, and I don't think anyone really questioned 7000 series because it was great.
Mhm.
Now everyone's like, wait a second, why is this? And but the loaded question thing is like on this, like the admin thing, that's going to help both of them. And so how much of this when we start diving in helps both sides? And maybe the loaded question is like, are these drivers half baked? Is the BIOS half baked? Like what's sitting there that's not fully ready? And I think that's kind of what we're going to hear with the 9000 series Ryzen. It's, you know, half baked. Now,
Yeah.
really interesting, we're hearing some rumblings um that because obviously this launch has been not the way I think AMD was kind of hoping it would go. Um,
No.
no, but in all of these BIOS updates, there's talk that there's going to be a performance mode unlock on both the 96 and the 9700X. That's going to bump the TDPs up to 105. I think that this is, you know,
I think that's where they should have
AMD has
launched
got
in
to
the
do
in the
something.
first place.
Yeah, that's how they think they should have. AMD is going to have some issues here. They've got to address that people are starting to question if this was released and half baked. Um, they really need to address this. I think it's probably sooner rather than later. If it is, the best thing that they can do is not to do it until dead and just like, nope, it's not a problem. The best thing that they can say is, look, we know that these processors have issues. We're fixing them. We will have these properly sorted off with BIOS updates ready to go partners in and however much long time. Um, and I think that they need to come out and say, we're going to bump up some, we're going to increase the performance of 9600X and 9700X owners. And oh, by the way, 9800X is going to come out at the same time, X3D. And I think you got to just come out and be like, here you go. Drop the pricing on those two processors, bump the performance so that it's a positive win-win, change the narrative from a negative to a positive. And so when you get back to reviewers and say, this is not a $329 part, this is a $289 part.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and I think that would really make for the value proposition for the 9000 series at that point, because most of the reviewers I've seen that have compared the 7000 to the 9000 series are saying go with the 7000. It's basically the same
uh,
performance and it's cheaper, you know?
I think, thus lies the issue of where AMD is right now. Um, if you're going to say that now, in years past, you kind of started winding down production of your prior gen as you start winding up production of your current. So by the time the new gen comes out, but AMD has been pushing this, let's make processors for everybody. And, AM4 still gets processor
Yeah.
releases.
Why would they release AM4 processors? They're 2 years out of the cycle at this point. It doesn't make sense.
The only positive thing I have about that piece is at least they're coming out with new stuff, which means new BIOS updates for all of these boards.
Mhm.
Um, these are not exciting processors, by the way. The XT processors, they're just renamed from the current 5000 gen, and there's even talk that there's going to be a 5500X3D.
That doesn't make any
Yes,
sense. Yeah,
it
I saw
actually
that.
made some. Yeah, it made some listings for a 5500X 3D. Now, I love this in so many different ways. I it's a love-hate relationship here with this.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the 5900 and the 58 or whatever the XT products are, like that just seems like it's a stretch trying to get something into market. Which again, I don't see a need for either of those processors because I mean, you're still competing with 5800X 3D, 5700X 3D, 56, like all of those. Like, why would you release a non X3D part on AM4? That's kind of dumb. Now, the 5500X 3D, depending on what the specs are, but could this possibly be a 4-core, 8-thread X3D part? If so, that could be wildly appealing to somebody who is maybe on a third gen or a second gen AM4 platform, doesn't want to spend a ton of money, but wants to get the benefits of X3D.
Hmm.
And that could be a very appealing, like budget gamer piece.
Yeah.
And I hope AMD kind of looks at this and says, maybe there is something here for X3D to have a budget gamer entry level where you say, look, we're going to sell an X3D part. We're going to sell a motherboard part. We're going to, we're going to get more sales and we're going to really own that budget gamer. And so I think the 5500X3D is really kind of more or less a test to see how that sells and how it's viewed and really brought in. But what if you could give a Zen 5, so like a 9500X3D, where you have the newer generations? It's almost kind of like when Nvidia came out with the 1660 Ti.
Yeah.
It was the Turing architecture, but without the ray tracing. And it was like, look, you can get all the benefits of of this, and we just strip out the ray tracing piece. But you're going to get all the efficiency improvements from Turing. You're going to get
The
all
AI
of the
stuff.
power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, you don't get AI because that's using the RTX cores.
No, it works on tensor cores. The tensor cores are separate from the
There are no
RT.
tensor cores in the 1660.
I thought the 1660 did
Mm-mm.
because it works with
Nope.
DLSS.
It's a no, it does not. It's a GTX part, not an RTX part.
I could have sworn it worked with DLSS. Wow.
Mm-mm.
Well, it's.
Nope.
I mean, how long ago was that card launched? And I never
I
had
know.
one, so you know.
Well, what's crazy is that piece on the laptop side is actually still active, which is crazy. But anyways, that's
Yeah.
neither here nor there. I really think that AMD has an opportunity to see how well that 5500X 3D does. And I think the real big thing is going to be the value proposition for budget gamers. If
Yep.
they can get that into a budget gaming price and deliver good X3D performance, good gaming performance, this could be a really interesting pick because, what if you had a 5500X 3D Pro where you had fewer cores, but you had X3D and all of your cores had X3D and you would have like super X3D where you had like double the speed.
Yeah.
You could make a gaming, like just a pure gaming processor and say, you know what, this is not going to be amazing for high threaded pieces, but for a 4-core 8-thread, if you give me $245, I'll give you 256 megabytes of X3D cache on split between 4 cores and 8 threads.
Yeah.
And big cores, big powerful cores. It doesn't need to be a ton because you'd only have 4 cores. Really interesting thought process there. We'll see if that actually comes like full circle, but I really do think that's something that could be. And I think as the AM5 platform matures, it's the 9000 series, we're going to see some changes. We're not done with this topic of conversation at all.
Yeah.
I think, and if we are, that's sad because that means that AMD is doing the same thing that Intel's doing and just being like, no problem. I don't see the issue.
Yep.
Um, but obviously, this is half baked, and this is not what they need. The other thing that did not make our list here is we're starting to see some Strix Point laptops and maybe some details. Um, and we're looking at October, November-ish of this year for Strix Point. And it's my understanding that those Strix Point are going to be not a paper launch, that there are going to be multiple partners who are launching several laptops in several different tiers with several different GPUs, for all the way from ones that have a like just an APU where it's the Radeon APU built in,
Mhm.
to things that we'll see 4060s, 4070s, 4080s, 4090s, like really a broad swing in that laptop spectrum from a performance perspective. Um, these will be very interesting to see where the performance is. And if these get pushed back, this might be an indication that maybe software is not fully ready on those yet.
Mhm.
So, the honest truth is that, look, we're in August and we've only got 4 more months until Christmas. Um, so could we see where we don't recommend people buy new current gen stuff because they're just a little buggy?
Mm.
I don't think anybody is ever going to recommend 12th or 13th gen um,
Or 14th,
Intel,
yeah.
or 14th, sorry, 13th and 14th.
I honestly, I
But
wouldn't even recommend 12th at this point. I mean, I know people are recommending it, but I mean, I think the data shows that the risk of issues is still there.
yeah, and I think on the desktop side, absolutely. So it will be very interesting to see how these next couple of months go, because I could see a path where people are like, yeah, Ryzen 9000 series is amazing, go with that. They've sorted all of their stuff out. But I think that's up to AMD to really get that stuff sorted off in the next month. I think they really need to make a push, and it would be smart for them to push that with a X3D part that's going to come out at that same time,
Yeah.
just to get new reviews and get more positive buzz. But they've got to do their homework to make sure that stuff works.
Now,
But
one of the
that's
things,
AMD.
yeah, well, one of the things I like that laptop manufacturers are doing, even with AMD now, is they're including Thunderbolt ports on a lot of their laptops, and my gaming laptop has one. And honestly, my dream is if I could get my hands on a Strix Point where it was good enough to not need a discrete GPU for 90% of the things, and then I could just rip my 6900 XT out of my desktop, plop it into a graphics card dock, and take that as a LAN party rig with my laptop. I'd be all about that. Because then you get the benefits of the good battery life from having processor graphics and the ability to access the power of a desktop GPU without being limited by what amounts to a cut down low end desktop GPU.
I don't think that we're far off from APUs that are going to just be comparable to discrete.
Yeah.
And I think that this is probably where we're going to see the biggest movement from Nvidia on, because I think they realize that if they keep doing this and not having a all in one piece, they are going to have a real problem on the desktop side, because AMD really does have everything all in one.
Yeah.
And I look, when it comes to laptop, you don't have to be the fastest. But if you can get something playable at whatever resolution your monitor's at, whether that's 4K or 1080p, you can make a really good selling point on those. And I think that that's probably where AMD's probably really putting some focus on with the Strix Point, because the notion is that if you could combine that with a Radeon 6000 part, you know, but it's crazy. Like I'm actually in the market for laptops, and I've been looking and looking and looking. And what's really interesting is you start looking from, you know, discrete graphics and performance from the top down, and start looking at what's out there. You like the 7000 series from AMD. is almost non-existent. And when you look out there, okay, yeah, they're out there for like $2,800. And I'm like, okay, I get that you're trying to be competitive with like a 4090 on the laptop side, but that might be why you're not selling a lot of them. Because if I'm going to be spending $2,800 and I'm not going to get a lot of the benefits like DLSS or ray tracing or all the stuff on a laptop that I'm kind of, that's not going to get any upgrade paths. If I'm going to spend the beans, I don't know if I'm sitting there very happy with that. And with the AMD side, but when you get to the lower stuff, like I was looking for a 6850M, non-existent, 6800M, non-existent. Now, if you get to the 7700S and the 7600M, you finally start getting into some pieces there. But I mean, it's very interesting. It's very telling that you're not getting a lot of traction on those AMD graphics in the laptop side. Now, I do think Strix Point probably has a really good opportunity here to kind of get some of these relationships, and where AMD could say, look, we can do this, but we can also do this on the same board, and you can be a total AMD piece. Because part of me was looking at this saying, I really would like it, but when it's all said and done on the laptop side, I almost like I don't want to touch the 13th and 14th gen Intel CPUs. I am concerned about that. And so I'm like, okay, so now I need to go find a Ryzen CPU with an NVIDIA GPU. And
Mm-hmm.
they're out there. Um, the cheap ones are actually the Intel processors. And so I've got to figure out myself if I'm interested in trying to risk those parts, on the laptop side. I know Intel says that they're not affected. I don't believe them
Yeah,
at
I
all.
don't think anybody really does, to be honest.
No.
But I mean, that's the other thing too is the laptop I have. I picked up the Zephyrus G15 with the Ryzen 9, and I think it was the 40. I think it was the 4890HX. I don't remember the exact part number off the top of my head, but anyway, it's been a good part, and I've had it since late 2021, and it hums right along. Now the interesting thing is I'm seeing AMD parts like if I go on Best Buy or Newegg or any of the other major retailers, if you look for a laptop with AMD, you will see the top end AMD CPU, or well, technically APU, paired with pretty much everything from a 10 series mobile all the way up to a 40 series mobile, and it varies hugely in cost. I mean, I paid 2100 for mine, and it's got a 3080M in it, so it's not the top of the heap because it's only the 8 gig version. Um, but that's something to be mindful of too, because you might be getting a rockin' CPU, but picking that AMD APU as your primary driver kind of makes your choices for onboard GPU weird. It doesn't.
Well,
Some of them don't make a whole lot of sense.
no, they don't. And it'll be interesting to kind of see what Strix Point looks like when it finally gets here. I think the loaded thing, and I think in my perspective, I think the expectation is that Strix Point's maybe going to be a little bit behind as AMD maybe focuses on, I don't know, fixing their desktop CPUs right now. Um, and then maybe making sure that laptops don't have the same problem,
Right.
because you would hate to have the same issue. But with that being said, let's move off of AMD. Let's go to Intel. Um, okay, so really interesting. Look, obviously the 129 microcode update from Intel came out, and overall, that was from a lot of reviewers was, oh yeah, it's no big difference. We're starting to see some people who are saying that the BIOS and the implementation really is going to change from motherboard manufacturer to manufacturer. And I we're seeing some people who are reporting bigger drops than in the reviews.
Hmm.
Now, I have the thinking, the question, and it pops in my mind. Intel's a big name. Nobody wants to upset to rock the cart. Nobody wants to get blackballed on it. Um, I start to possibly question, from a reviewer's perspective of their I don't know. I think some reviewers are maybe not as in depth as they could be. Um, Look, the 129 is going to have a negative impact on your performance. Now, why we would have some people with a 20, 30 plus performance drop and others with a single digit begs the question, like, is somebody who is doing the 37%, the 30% drop in performance, are they just not knowing what they're doing? I
Could
could
be.
put that could be it.
Could be
Um,
testing methodology, yeah. Well,
could be.
and the other interesting thing is too, this BIOS has been out for nearly a week now, and Gamers Nexus hasn't released any data on it, which is, or well, not any significant amount of data on it, which is very interesting because I Gamers Nexus does a lot of the testing the same way I did when I was in Intel's lab, where they make sure the data is accurate for what their experience is. And my question there would be, are they seeing the same variance and trying to figure out what's causing it? Because that would really explain why we haven't seen any info coming out of them yet. But Jay's
I
two
think
cents didn't see much of a drop.
all I will say is that I think 129 is going to have a performance drop. We have to keep in mind that some people are not going to do reviews on this because it's a beta BIOS. These are
Hmm.
all betas.
True.
Um, some of these manufacturers might be getting it wrong. Some people might have really weird configurations that could be, causing an issue. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
But what we are seeing for sure, and then this goes both with MSI, I mean with AMD and Intel. Um, I firmly believe that there are motherboard manufacturers out there that have done a very, very good job of implementing how these BIOSes work, whether that's a 9000 AMD part or a 13900K.
Hmm.
When they release these, you're seeing who is really, really good at the BIOS. If you've got somebody who's really getting hammered on performance versus someone who isn't. Now, that could also be somebody saying, well, we don't want to be the slowest. So let's just keep those voltages a little bit on the high side and maybe pushing some of these pieces. And on the Intel side, you could continue to see failures, and that would come back to maybe it being a BIOS and a motherboard piece. But at this point, I don't think anyone's going to blame anybody other than Intel.
Yeah.
Um, all I can say is that my view of motherboard manufacturers is changing. I'm not going to say right now because I'm not willing to go buy a part, but I will say this: I have looked at different motherboards to possibly purchase a different board because I actually believe I'm probably missing out on some performance on my current board,
Yeah.
and I would be very interested to see how another motherboard manufacturer would work well with my specific system. So,
Well, yeah, I've
um,
been looking at a couple of different manufacturers myself because I mean I used to buy Asus because they were the top, but they're not anymore. And I mean for me, I'm looking mostly at MSI right now personally, just because of some of the things I see them doing on the GPU side, especially on the Nvidia segment of their business. They're doing things that other manufacturers aren't, like putting in fuses where Nvidia recommends them. There, where others are skipping the fuses and just, well, if your board shorts, it might send 12 volts to your 1.8 volt pin on your PCI Express card, but then again, it might not. That's low chance. But if it's an MSI card, you get that 12 volts, that fuse is going to pop and save your motherboard. Probably
Yeah.
cook your GPU, but uh, would you like a cooked GPU and a cooked motherboard, or just a cooked GPU?
Yeah.
So, I mean, MSI is doing some things lately that I really do appreciate seeing, that you wouldn't necessarily see unless you got deep into what the hardware actually is designed like.
Okay, so
So,
you're talking MSI real quick, and I have to
yeah,
bring this up because this is not on
sure.
our show notes at all. Could you see Zotac? No, is it Zotac who Kingpin's going to work for? No, it's
No,
PNY.
it's PNY.
PNY. Okay, so if that comes full circle, does PNY enter into motherboards? And if they do, are
Potentially.
you excited about it?
I don't know about excited, but I'm intrigued.
Okay, okay. Because the other thing that's really interesting, we talk about manufacturers is, and we've seen this from MSI, you brought it up, but MSI is demoing more and more boards with CAM2 DDR5 systems.
Yep.
And this is from, and MSI obviously has been really pushing this. They've shown at least 5 or 6 different versions of boards with CAM2 DDR5.
Hmm.
And they really are talking CAM2 DDR up. I would be very, very interested in getting something like this um, from a performance perspective because I do believe there is some really good benefits for going into this. And I think that the loaded question is I think Cam Ram is here to stay.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing where this is going, and I just I don't think we're going to see the traditional sticks of DDR. I think this is going to be the end of it. I don't know if we're going to start. If you'll see Cam2 DDR5 or if Cam2 doesn't really come out until DDR6. Um, but with Cam2, it's a really interesting layout and technology that this could really change not only motherboards, but this has the ability because of how it's set up and how that technology works of really getting into some unique products like upgradable graphics because it's set where it is.
Hmm.
You very well could get Cam2 DDR7 and you could have DDR7 modules for graphics, or maybe they'll call it GDDR7 for gaming for GPU or something like that. But
Yeah.
I really could see the market moving into this piece, and especially when you have motherboard manufacturers like MSI pushing this. Um, it's kind of like those reverse layouts for the power where they put the pins in the back. I mean, we talked about that for years. How cool it'd be to not have any wires
Yep.
at all and have everything go to the back of the motherboard. Um,
Well, and the
I
side mounts
just
that some of the brands do is a really good compromise in that respect. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, there are some initiatives right now. Asus has one. Going back to Asus, has one where the GPU gets all of its power from the board itself,
the board
rather
itself.
than
Yeah,
through PCI Express cables, or
I'm
what
fine
is it,
with
the
all of
12
that.
bhp?
I'm fine with all of that as long as it comes back to a standard.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
long as it's a standard, I have no issues with any of that.
A- and that's always my concern when we see new things like Cam 2, like 12VO, like the 12 volt high power that Nvidia is using now, instead of PCI Express, which arguably in the 4090 is wildly underpowered for the envelope they're operating in. But it it needs to be available pretty much everywhere, but people like you and me are going to be the ones that will potentially drive that. And if we see a significant benefit, which I think we will with things like CAM, uh, we'll probably see it spreading out sooner than later because it is a lot easier to manufacture on the board side, and it's a heck of a lot easier to manufacture on the memory side too. So, uh, but with all that said, looks like Intel's trying to make a comeback in the HEDT space. The Intel Extreme Edition parts might be making a return with Arrow Lake. You think they're gonna start doing that again? We're gonna see something to replace X299.
We'll see. I here's the problem I have with it, with this market right now. Intel may have this, and that's great. But in the past, Extreme Edition parts have come with a extreme price.
Yep.
They were always expensive. Given people's view of Intel, I don't think they're going to sell.
Yeah.
I question the sales ability of Arrow Lake in general, even on a consumer grade. Intel has done such a bad job. I don't doubt that they have them. I don't doubt that they can do it. Well, okay. I have questions if they can do it without killing themselves.
Mm.
But Intel has got to come off, and they have a PR disaster they have not mitigated. And unless they're interested in fixing it, I don't see Arrowlike doing very well.
Yeah.
Even if reviews, I mean, look, let's be honest, 13th and 14th gen processors, when they released, got wildly positive reviews, and everybody said this is the best thing since sliced bread. Well, get this. A year and a half later, now we're talking about these processors having a fixed shelf life of, I don't know how
A
however long
year,
it
two
is.
years.
Who knows?
Yeah.
And I think for people who have been burned by that and going through the RMA troubles, both from an Intel side and from an OEM side, um, I don't see people dropping $1,000 for a CPU, um, especially when the competition from Ryzen is going to be fierce.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I mean the Extreme Edition or the X series parts have always been bragging rights. Like, oh look, I've got the, you know, i7 920, and well, I mean I rocked that for nearly 10 years. And that's not something Intel wants. They don't want you buying a really kick-ass part and then hanging on to it for 10 years. They want you upgrading every year or two.
I mean, but part of the problem I have is that how many games are CPU dependent? There's not a ton of them out there.
There's a
Like a lot of
few,
people.
but nothing that the majority of people play. Like most everything these days is going to be GPU bound. But
So,
yeah,
yeah,
eventually it'll get
look,
there. But
yeah,
you
exactly.
know,
And I think that the look, the upgrade path, and I think most manufacturers and motherboard manufacturers see this, and system integrators are seeing this, and everybody sees this. Okay. Right now, the economy is questionable at best. And I think that you're going to have people who, instead of replacing their motherboard or processor and doing a whole new system, are probably going to do a graphics upgrade. If
mhm.
that,
Yeah, I mean,
when this, like, Corsair came out and said, "Oh yeah, our earnings suck because GTA 5 isn't out," I'm like, okay, come on, guys, you
really,
can't really just
yeah.
blame it
Come
on,
on,
yeah.
Corsair.
But
Yeah,
anyways,
exactly.
I don't think there's a ton of stuff pushing it. So,
No.
um, but last thing that we have here on this, and we're going to kick this short because it was a short week, is Microsoft pushing BitLocker with Windows 11. Is that requiring it?
Sort of. So it depends on what situation you're in. Some people are getting force upgraded to BitLocker if they're using a Microsoft account when they upgrade to 24H2. If you do a clean install of 24H2, it tries to enable it and force you into a Microsoft account as well. One of the really big drawbacks that people are seeing is if they have multiple physical drives in their system, every single drive is getting locked down with BitLocker. And so this is kind of where my recommendation of don't use a Microsoft account on your computer if you can avoid it comes into play. Now, if you're using a laptop, you're out and about, there is a data security question. Sure, use BitLocker. If you've got a corporate laptop, definitely use BitLocker. It's basic security that's always there. But for the average person, it's really not super important. It doesn't hurt until it does. And where it becomes a big problem is some of the repair channels on YouTube that I watch from time to time have noted that if, let's say you've got an Asus
Those are
laptop.
physical. No, are we talking physical drives connected? An M.2 and a
Yep.
SATA drive. What about a USB drive?
USB drives do not get encrypted with BitLocker unless you specifically select to
Okay,
encrypt it. So you're
because
safe there.
so I'm just thinking and obviously I would assume that would be network detect storage wouldn't have the same issue. It wouldn't have the same
Correct.
fees. So
Correct.
that's a positive thing because that would be really bad if you started locking people's and were like, "Hey, where's your thing?"
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and the
you
other
know,
thing they do too with the Microsoft account is with this new upgrade, they are very forceful about trying to get you into a Microsoft account. The hoops that you used to be able to jump through pre 24H2 have largely been removed and curtailed. You basically have to strip out the entire network stack from your computer at this point. It's not that bad. I am exaggerating a bit, but you have
hey,
to you have to go through level upon levels of tricks to be able to use a local account so that you're not forced to upload all of your data in your My Documents folder to OneDrive. Because guess what happens? As soon as you're connected to the network and you're logged into a Microsoft account, boom, everything gets blown onto OneDrive, whether you want it to or not.
I
And
think
that's got a lot of people ticked off at it, myself included.
okay, so and this was not on this either, but there is talk that there is going to be a Steam desktop.
I'm all for it. I'm here
Now
for it.
you've got the Steam Deck, and that has made some really pushes into Linux gaming on a ton of games on the Steam.
Yeah, Proton has been huge.
Huge and making really big strides in Linux. And if the ability for people to buy a Steam like desktop and using Linux, it's got to be scary to some extent. Now, I mean, for somebody like me on the business side, not sure I would have the ability to go away from Windows unless there were changes at my corporate IT. Uh, but I very well could see a Steam desktop be really, really helpful for me to
Hmm.
putting that because I don't have consoles. Consoles suck. Um, but I would be interested in having something that could connect some Bluetooth controllers to and set on top of to a TV and play some games
Hmm.
and maybe replace my home theater playback device, like maybe a Roku.
Yeah.
I would love that. Steam, if anyone listens, I don't think they do, but if they do, that would be great. Take what Roku has, figure out how to play as some and start putting some apps for that and make something that can play games that can replace my playback device. As long as you give me Plex and some basic apps like YouTube and you know Apple TV and whatever different type of streaming services people have,
Hmm.
that could be a very, very attractive piece. And again, pushing more and more people into that Linux space, because I think that's where they're going to find the best bang for your buck. I think the where you get Linux better is you have to get users. You've got to get people
Yeah.
trying to these things. And because right now, the games that aren't, it's like, well, there's not very many people. um you know if you get that many more users, that's really going to change that perspective. So I love it. Anything we could get away from Microsoft, that's fine. I'll have a laptop that I can use for work, and maybe my desktop turns into that.
Well, and I think your hope might be going down the right path, because I was digging through my drawer for a little bit of show and tell, but a few years ago, Steam end of lifed their little Steam box, which was basically
Yep.
a remote desktop client. I have one. I used to use it in the bedroom when my apartment was more than 20 feet deep, and it was useful. But yeah, I mean, it remoted into my desktop, and I could launch Steam games from there and play it in my bedroom if I wanted to. I could access stuff through a remote desktop window and all of that. Big picture mode worked pretty well. And, if they could bake that into a little smart device that you could load Plex and YouTube and, all the normal stuff on, that's a big win. And, to be perfectly honest, I would not be averse to dual booting my desktop. I
I
would
think,
I would be happy to partition off part of my SSD or get a bigger SSD and have 2 terabytes for Windows and 2 terabytes for Steam. And it's time to play games. Boot over into Steam, because Steam OS
but
boots up quick.
let's be honest. This could be very, very helpful, because what are we starting to see? We're starting to see stronger and stronger APUs. If you look at a lot of these minis forums desktops, or
Yep.
mini tops, or docks, however you want to call them, they are getting stronger and stronger. And I think we are probably fairly close to the ability for somebody to come out and say, we have this. I mean, AMD already has some really good mobility pieces. You know, what, and I already know the answer to this. I know that AMD is looking like, wait a second, what if we didn't have to deal with battery restrictions and battery life? What if we took this APU that we're playing games on, like Steam Deck or whatever it is that we have, these APUs like the ROG Ally. What if we put a bigger fan on this? And what if we put, the battery out, and we said, this isn't a 40-watt part. This is a 110-watt part.
Yeah.
You know, what if you could cool it in a bigger size? What if you could put this into a size of an Xbox price per se, or a PlayStation size, where it is something that sits on and replaces that, allows you to access Steam. Could Steam start to take over and just beat everybody at the console games of Xbox and PlayStation?
I think so.
Because
I think Steam
I
could
I
potentially be
think
the next
they,
console player.
well, and now, and beyond that, you kind of start going down the rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, Helldivers 2. All those Xbox players want to play it. Steam OS has it. It's easy to set up like
You could play it on a
Xbox is.
Steam Deck.
Play it on a, but get it to a point where you don't have to use a mobile piece. That
Yeah.
will be something. I think there's enough talk about that. It's going to happen.
Yeah,
But
well, and I think I've seen a couple of stories floating around. I don't remember for sure where people have actually extracted Steam OS and got it running on normal desktop hardware. And if you can accomplish that and get Proton working, which Proton works on everything. It's an open source thing that Valve is just constantly developing into. I Look, Valve came out of Microsoft. Gaben was hacked off at Vista and all the changes that Microsoft has been making since Vista, and rightly so. And you know, they're in a good position to potentially become the next Microsoft in terms of gaming. If they can get a usable Linux based operating system that you just drop in and is straight replacement where my mom could use it, it's kind of a no-brainer at that point where, hey, look, this is a free operating system, or you could pay Microsoft $100 every couple of years, and it's free. Have at it, boys. Oh, by the way, you get Steam sales.
Well, and I
You know?
think that that's, if you look at how Valve is set up, they don't make games really anymore. They're
Nope.
a hardware
They're
company,
they're a
and
hardware
they're a
company in a store.
hardware store.
Yep.
So it would make sense from their perspective to come up with something like this and have the ability of playing both sides of PlayStation. And now, does that get to a point where we're not going to see those titles come to Steam because of something like that, where you wouldn't see like a Helldivers 3, or you won't see a, whatever the current, like Forza, like, we see these games in Steam right now. If Valve came out and started going after their own users, does that, exclusivity, yeah, you can do this, and oh yeah, you can play it on PC. Does
Yeah.
that mean it's not going to see those? I think the loaded question is how many people are going to jump and say, oh, I'm not going to buy the next PlayStation 19 or whatever
Yeah.
version it is. So, look, that's it. Actually, kind of a light week, and I
Yeah, it
know
was
we're
a short
long,
week.
so
We're good at
appreciate everyone
dragging things
listening.
out.
We're good. And on that note, Moose.
Well, on that note, have fun storming the castle. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and comment and subscribe and all that good stuff. And we will see you again next time.
Take care, guys. Have a good day.